Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Ukraine is trying to turn a better strategic moment into diplomatic leverage before winter, and that is the big story today. President Volodymyr Zelensky is saying out loud that Kyiv wants progress on peace talks before the cold comes back. His argument is that Russia started losing battlefield initiative back in December 2025, and that pressure on Vladimir Putin needs to build now through sanctions, diplomacy, and the steady squeeze on Russia's war economy. That is the frame for everything else. Ukraine is not just trying to survive the next phase of the war. Kyiv is trying to shape the table before anyone sits down at it. Senior Ukrainian voices are talking about a window of several months to strengthen the country's hand. The message is Russia is tired, the Russian army is not generating clean breakthroughs, and Ukraine wants to walk into any negotiation with Moscow feeling the floor move underneath it. And the floor is moving in a very specific place: Russia's energy system. This is where Ukraine's strategy starts looking less like battlefield improvisation and more like a pressure campaign with receipts. Ukrainian strikes have hit refineries, oil pumping stations, fuel depots, port infrastructure, and energy nodes deep inside Russia. Saratov, Kirov, Rostov, Feodosia, and a growing list of refinery sites are now part of the conversation. That matters because Russia's energy sector does two things for the Kremlin. It funds the war and it fuels the war. Now we are seeing signs of stress. Russian-backed authorities in occupied Crimea are rationing gasoline. Sevastopol officials said daily fuel supplies were gone within hours. Moscow has announced its first-ever ban on jet fuel exports through November 30th, officially to stabilize the domestic market. That is not exactly the kind of headline the Kremlin wants on the brochure. The old Soviet-style Confidence Act works better when people are not lining up for fuel and officials are not suddenly discovering the virtues of ration coupons. Europe is also getting more serious about Russia's oil escape routes. France boarded and diverted the Russia-linked tanker Tagor in the Atlantic, about 400 nautical miles west of Brittany, with support from the United Kingdom and other partners. President Emmanuel Macron framed it plainly: vessels that dodge sanctions and violate maritime rules are helping finance Russia's war. The bigger picture is Russia's so-called shadow fleet, a floating shell game of flag hopping, murky ownership, and who-me paperwork. Europe has sanctioned hundreds of suspected vessels, and France has now boarded multiple ships believed to be tied to that network since September. The maritime sanctions game is getting more physical. At the same time, Moscow is trying to keep its neighborhood in line, and Armenia is getting the treatment. Russia moved to restrict seafood imports from nearly all Armenian processing plants after already pressuring Armenian produce, flours, mineral water, and alcohol. The timing is not subtle. Armenia is heading into parliamentary elections, and Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's government has been moving closer to the European Union. Putin has warned Armenia against what he called a Ukrainian scenario and said Armenia cannot square EU ambitions with membership in the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union. Translation: Moscow is reminding Yerevan that in the Kremlin's world, independent foreign policy is considered suspicious behavior. The intelligence picture is also getting sharper. European security officials say Russian intelligence services are aggressively hunting Western technology as sanctions bite. They are looking for machine tools, factory equipment, defense technology, software, camera systems, laser technology, and research tied to space, quantum, Arctic, and maritime capabilities. This is not glamorous spy fiction with tuxedos and casino tables. It is fake companies, middlemen, cyber operations, and sanctioned procurement networks. Less James Bond, more gray market LinkedIn with a side of malware, and the risk appetite appears to be growing. Officials in Sweden, Finland, Estonia, and the United Kingdom describe Russia as more willing to take chances, even when attribution is likely. That tracks with separate reporting on suspected sabotage affecting German naval vessels, including damaged fuel lines, cut cables, contaminated engine spaces, and tampering with ship systems. For NATO, this is the uncomfortable part. Russia can pressure Europe below the threshold of open war, using sabotage, cyber activity, criminal proxies, and procurement networks to stretch allied security services. Inside Russia, the security state is not just participating in the war, it is expanding because of it. Reporting on the Federal Security Service, the FSB, describes an agency gaining influence over military and political decision-making while also expanding its grip across society. Internet controls, school propaganda, legal prosecutions, and repression are all part of the wartime ecosystem. Putin came out of that world, and the system is now behaving exactly like a system built by people who think suspicion is a governing philosophy. The FSB and other hawkish factions are reportedly playing a larger role as Moscow leans into escalation messaging, including the use of the Oreshnik intermediate-range missile in a May 24th attack on Kyiv. The nuclear risk story is back as well, centered once again on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russia accused Ukraine of striking the Unit 6 turbine hall and later a transport shop at the Russian-occupied plant. Kyiv denied it and called the allegation a propaganda ploy. The International Atomic Energy Agency said its personnel observed damage consistent with a drone impact, but did not assign blame. Rafael Grossi, the IAEA chief, warned that attacking nuclear sites is like playing with fire. Then Dmitry Medvedev did what Dmitry Medvedev tends to do. He reached for the escalatory megaphone and threatened so-called symmetrical strikes against Ukrainian or NATO nuclear facilities if Zaporizhzhia were destroyed. That is the Kremlin escalation cocktail. Disputed incident, nuclear anxiety, public threat, repeat as necessary. Ukraine also has domestic political pressure building at the worst possible time. Andriy Yermak, Zelensky's former chief of staff and once one of the most powerful unelected figures in the country, has been arrested and accused of laundering millions of dollars through a luxury housing development outside Kyiv. Prosecutors also alleged he consulted an astrologer on political decisions, including senior appointments. Yes, apparently, Veronica Feng Shui office has entered the wartime political lexicon. Yermak denies the allegations. For Zelensky, the problem is not direct implication. Anti-corruption agencies have not accused him. The problem is proximity. Yermak was close, powerful, and central. That makes the case politically radioactive. But there is another way to read it, and Ukrainian officials are clearly leaning into that angle. A prosecution like this shows that Ukraine's anti-corruption bodies still have teeth. In Russia, a former top presidential confidant getting hauled into court like this would be less a rule of law story and more the opening scene of a mystery where everyone already knows not to ask questions. For Ukraine's EU ambitions and Western credibility, ugly accountability may still be better than polished impunity. There is also a quieter justice problem. U.S. aid cuts have weakened networks investigating alleged Russian war crimes in Ukraine. Ukrainian prosecutors have opened more than 230,000 war crimes cases since 2022, covering alleged attacks on civilians, torture, sexual violence, and the deportation of children. Groups like Truth Hounds have slowed work and laid off staff. Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab, which tracks missing Ukrainian children, is expected to run out of money in August after withheld funding. That matters because war crimes evidence has a shelf life. Memories fade, sites change, documents disappear. Justice delayed can become justice lost. Now briefly, the battlefield piece, because it matters only insofar as it supports the strategic picture. Ukraine is using drones to put pressure on Russian logistics across occupied territory, including supply routes in Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and Crimea. Russian sources themselves have acknowledged fuel shortages, disrupted troop rotations, and ammunition problems. Ukraine's defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, has called this a logistics lockdown, and that phrase captures the point. Kyiv is trying to make Russia's rear areas feel unsafe enough that the front line becomes harder to sustain. Ukraine is also turning drone warfare into diplomatic currency. Zelensky wants a major drone framework deal with the U.S., arguing that Ukraine has battlefield experience. Washington does not, while American companies have artificial intelligence tools Ukraine wants. Kyiv already has drone arrangements with some Middle Eastern and European countries and is preparing a larger EU deal. That is the future of war marketplace arriving in real time. Combat data, industrial scale, AI, and hard lessons learned under fire. Thanks for listening and being part of this community. If you're finding value here, a review, comment, or share helps more people stay informed. We also publish a daily intel brief on Substack at restrictedhandling.substack.com, where we go deeper on Russia, China, Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Stay safe and have a great week.